So, I don't know about you, but when I was at your phase of life, I felt pretty strongly about making my own decisions. I was very uncomfortable with anyone telling me what to do and how to do things and suggesting they knew best. And very honestly, that came from my story, which I've shared little bits and pieces to you. It came from real things that happened in my life. And I think that is the nature of being a young person, that we struggle to grow into our roles as adults, that we want to do things our own way. We want to do things on our own. And if this is you, guess what? You are normal. You are normal if you identify with these things. When we're kids, we're always being told what to do. Well, we can't very well grow into be a successful adult if we can't begin to think for ourselves and figure out what the right way is for us to go and how to do things on our own. This process naturally creates tension with our authority people in our life. And I don't know about the authority people in your life, but typical authority figures would include parents, maybe grandparents or other relatives, teachers, coaches, pastors, maybe youth ministry leaders and so forth. And within that group of authority people, you may be hearing different things. So it can be confusing if you are hearing one authority person say, this is what's right, this is what's important, but you hear another authority person say something different. It'd be hard to sort that out, and that's your next blank, confusing. So who do you listen to? And if our trust has been broken along the way, if we've been betrayed by an authority person, then it can be even more difficult, leaving us even more resistant to listening to people. So this was very true for me. I had been sexually abused by my dad until I was 14 years old. And at that point, he finally walked out on the family, leaving us in terrible poverty. Added to this was the fact that my mom was ill most of my growing up years. She lived in a hospital bed in our family room. And so a lot of things around the home fell to me, being the oldest kid. And I didn't feel like I had anybody in the home who was really taking care of me, looking after my interests, being helpful or supportive in any way, because my parents had major issues going on. And that's why I say I very honestly came into adulthood feeling like there wasn't anybody who could or would guide my life other than myself. And so I very naturally stepped into that role, and some of you may already be in that position at this point in your life. So I decided I'm going to be my own power source, and I'm going to decide what the best way to go is. I'm going to be my own protector and guard my life from pain and problems. I'm going to block all of that from happening to me, and I'll be my own provider and get my needs met my own way. And there's your blanks, next three blanks, the same word, own. I'm going to do it my own way. Little did I know that these choices I made set my life on a very painful course for many years. I'll come back to that in a moment. But before I do, I want to first tell you a story about some folks who also wanted to do things their own way. They too struggled with authority, and the authority that they struggled with was God Himself. So if you'll get your Bibles ready for Exodus 6, we'll be there in a moment. Exodus 6, second book of the Bible. The Old Testament holds very powerful lessons for us today. Never discount the Old Testament just because it happened such a long time ago. It is still relevant to us, and it still teaches us important things about life that are true today. The major thread through the Old Testament is the Jewish people, the Israelites. We've already covered another big story about the Israelites, and that was Joseph's story. And at the end of that story, we watch the Israelites leave Canaan. They left the land that God promised to them through Abraham. And at that time, when they left and moved to Egypt, they were a family of 70 people. And you might remember from our story last week, when they arrived, they were favored guests. They were welcomed by Pharaoh the ruler. They were given the best real estate, but that favor changed over time. The leadership changed. A new Pharaoh came on board, and the Israelites were a very fruitful group. They may have been 70 when they arrived, but over time they grew to a group of about 2 million people. And at that point, the Egyptians became intimidated by them, afraid of this massive group of people who really weren't one of them. And so their response to that threat was to make them slaves. All 2 million of the Israelites. I'm going to read this passage out of Exodus 1, 12 to 14. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. I want you to remember that as we go through this story tonight. They worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So the people cried out to God, and he heard them, and God had compassion on them. The people, however, felt that God had forgotten them, that God was not paying attention. And there's your next blank, forgotten. But in the midst of this, God raised up Moses to deliver the people out of bondage and take them back to their rightful land, to the promised land, which we know is Israel today. God, however, knew that the people would never succeed in the new land. This was the problem. They'd been slaves for a long time. They would not succeed if they tried to go into the new land with slave mentalities. They would get slaughtered. Some changes needed to occur in their heart and in their mind before they could successfully go in. The people fought Moses all the way. They never, ever stopped complaining. In spite of everything, though, it happened just like God said it would. I skipped a page. Okay, I knew something would sound right. So, let me pick it up where I picked up 2 pages. So their minds and heart needed to be free. There's your next blank, free. And that is a worthy lesson for us today. That's why I said the Old Testament has important lessons for you and me today. So think about how you are going to travel through this important season of your life. As you are now moving into adulthood, how are you going to learn the necessary lessons? How are you going to get that for yourself so that you can move into adulthood? Well, that's what we're here for. That's kind of this class in a nutshell, to equip you and prepare you to make this vital transition successfully. So God sent Moses to be their leader, and it's going to be a fight because Pharaoh is not going to let the people go easily. Has absolutely no interest in doing that because they are his free labor force. They're his slaves. I mean, they do Pharaoh's bidding and building and every terrible job he can think of. So God, in order to get his will done, he sends 10 plagues to reveal his power. But it isn't so much for Pharaoh's benefit that God is sending these plagues as it is for his children, his people, the Israelites. The plagues were for them, not for Pharaoh. Because I want you to think about it. I mean, if God wanted to change Pharaoh's heart so he would let the people go, I mean, he could do that with the snap of his fingers. He did not need 10 plagues to convince Pharaoh. He could have done that instantly. This is not about God struggling to overcome Pharaoh. That's not what's going on here. These 10 plagues were for the benefit of the Israelites, so they would see God's power and love. That's the whole of it. So that they would see God's power and love. Remember, the last big story was Joseph's story, and that was 400 years ago. So they haven't had a fresh encounter with God for a very long time, not as an entire people group anyway. And so before God gets started on this big story here, he has to make sure the Israelites understand where true power comes from. That's what he's got to communicate to them. God knows us. He knows if there is any way at all that we can take credit ourselves or excuse it away or put some other spin on it, that we will do that. And so to prevent that, God tells them what he's going to do before he does it. And that brings us to Exodus 6. Before the first plague ever occurred, God tells Moses this. The Lord said to Moses, Exodus 6 verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand he will drive them out of his country. You'll see a paraphrase on your outline, and I want you to go ahead and fill it in with your name, because I want you to know that God will use his power and love to help you too, to benefit your life. It's not just for the Israelites. Then the Lord said to Moses, now Cindy will see. Put your name in there. What I will do to Pharaoh, because of my mighty hand, I will let Cindy go. Scripture is relevant to you today in your life. So God is saying, pay attention, guys. I'm about to get the ball rolling here, and you're going to see some amazing stuff happen. And when it's over, you'll be free from captivity, and you will know who the true power source is. You will know that I do have the power and love to help you. And at first the people didn't believe Moses. As I said, they complained about everything. They fought Moses every day of these 40 years. And it didn't help things that when Moses and came to Pharaoh and the plague started, the brutality got worse. So things didn't get better instantly, and that's not uncommon for our life. God can still be working, and we may see initially things are not better. They might, in this case, they got more difficult for a short time. But this is a war. This is a war for the hearts and minds of God's people, a demonstration so that they can see who really is almighty, who really does have the power. Is it Pharaoh? Is he the powerful one, or is God the powerful one? That's the war going on here. So what is God's goal in this? Exodus 6, look at verse 7 this time. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know. That's his goal. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. So God had two goals. He wanted to do life with them. He wanted to do life with his children. And secondly, he wanted to teach them to put their trust in his power. I'll tell you what, if you guys get that lesson down at this point in your life, you are going to be a mile higher than 99% of the adults who are 20, 30, 40, 50 years older than you. If you get that down, so important. Put your trust in God's power, not anyone else's. So you can fill in a paraphrase here again on your outline with your name. Then Cindy will know that I'm the Lord her God who brought Cindy out from the yoke of the Egyptians. So this first lesson is over. And the first lesson is trust God, not yourself. He is powerful. We are not powerful. So I'm going to give you three very important P's, and that's why I said this lesson is one of the most important of the entire year. This concept we're going over tonight, the 3 Ps, will permeate everything we do going forward. So the first one is power, and there are 2 more to go. I'm looking at some confusion. Is there a problem in that?
Yeah, it seems like maybe we skipped something here.
I was picking up that there
Section
must
3.
be.
Yeah, section 3 or 4.
Just mark it and I'll take a look
Okay.
at it. I apologize for that. As you know, we're working out the bugs, so apparently we just found a bug. So if you can find mid-lesson break, then we'll all be in the same place. I apologize for the confusion on your.
88, middle of the page.
88? Okay. And so this is a moment for you to think about your own life. I'm wondering if there's been a time in your life where God saved you, where God provided a way for you to be free from something, or God helped you. Can you identify that? Maybe write down a couple words to describe that. And then secondly, the opposite, a time you just trusted yourself, went your own way. Possibly it didn't have a good outcome. So first part, a time God helped you, saved you, got you free from something. Second part, a time when you know that you were just trusting yourself. Give you a second to do that.